चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Tonight we will be speaking from Srimad Bhagavat Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This is a very important text, number 19 of the 7th chapter, and I will try to make a few comments based mainly on those given by Srila Prabhupada, of course, also Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Generally, Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita purports follow those of Baladev Vidyabhushan, so maybe we can say a few words about that as well. So we'll begin with the Sanskrit. Bahunam janmanamante Gnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudeva sarvamiti Samahatma sudurlabham. Bahunam janmanamante Gnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudeva sarvamiti Samahatma sudurlabham. Bahunam janmanamante Gnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudeva sarvamiti Samahatma sadurlabha.
Bahunam janmanamante Jnanam apurayate Vasudeva sarvamnidhi Samahatma sadurlabha.
Bahunam janmanamante Jnanam prapadyate
Vasudeva sarvamiti
Samahatma sudurlabha.
Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha Bahunam Janmanamante Nanavan Jam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha Bahunam many Janmanam repeated births and deaths Ante after Gnanavan one who is in full knowledge Mam unto me Prapadyate surrenders Vasudeva the personality of Godhead Krishna Sarvam everything Iti thus Sah that Mahatma great soul Sudurlabha very rare to see This is again Srimad Bhagavat Gita as it is, chapter 7, text 19. Translation is, after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Beautiful purport. He says, the living entity, while executing devotional service or transcendental rituals, after many, many births, may actually become situated in transcendental, pure knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. In the beginning of spiritual realization, while one is trying to give up one's attachment to materialism, there is some leaning towards impersonalism. But when one was further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in the spiritual life, and that these activities constitute devotional service. Realizing this, he becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrenders to Him. At such a time, one can understand that Lord Sri Krishna's mercy is everything, that He is the cause of all causes, and that this material manifestation is not independent from Him. He realizes that the material world to be a perverted reflection of spiritual variegatedness, and realizes that in everything there is a relationship with the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Thus he thinks of everything in relation to Vasudeva, or Sri Krishna. Such a universal vision of Vasudeva precipitates one's full surrender to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna as the highest goal. Such surrendered great souls are very rare. This verse is nicely explained in the 3rd chapter, verses 14 and 15 of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Sahasrashirsha Purushah Sahasraksha Sahasrapat Sabhumim Vishwatovaritvat Yatishtad Dashangulam Purusha evedagam sarvam yadbhutam yaccha bhavyam utamratatvasyeşano yadannena tirohati. Anybody recognize these verses? Prabhupada is saying it's from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Do we know these verses from some other source? Purusha Sukta in the Rig Veda. Famous verses. We use these verses when we worship the deity. In the Chandogya Upanishad, 5.1.15, it is said, Na vaivacho na chakshungsi, na shrotrani na mamangsiti, achakshate prana iti, eva, achakshate prano hi evaitani sarvani bhavanti. Which means, in the body of a living being, neither the power to speak, nor the power to see, nor the power to hear, nor the power to think is the prime factor. It is life which is the center of all activities. Similarly, Lord Vasudeva, or the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, is the prime entity in everything. In this body there are powers of speaking, of seeing, of hearing, of mental activities, etc. But these are not important if not related to the Supreme Lord. And because Vasudeva is all-pervading, and everything is Vasudeva, the devotee surrenders in full knowledge. As per Bhagavad Gita 7:17 and 11:40. Very significant verses. We might as well revisit 17 because it's just a few verses away. Tesham jnani nitya yukta eka bhaktir vishishyate priyo hi jnani notyartham aham sachamama priyah. Krishna is talking about 4 kinds of pious people who surrender to him, whether in pure devotion or not. Who are they? The artha, the person who's distressed, and artharthi, the person who wants wealth, and the jignasu, the person who's just curious, and jnani. So he says of these, the jnani is very special, and he's very dear to me. I'll read text 18. Udaraha sarva eva ete jnani tvatma eva me matam asthitaha sahi yuktatma mamevannuttamam gatim. All these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, but he who is situated in knowledge of me I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me, the highest and most perfect goal. And that brings us to today's verse. Bahunan janmanamante jnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudevah sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Obviously, we're talking about what kind of jnani? Is this the kind of jnani who wants to merge into the impersonal Brahman? No. It's the kind of jnani who worships Krishna on the basis of his knowledge. Now it's interesting that Prabhupada has translated this as, he says that the jnani is engaged in my transcendental service. Why transcendental? Because the others are not necessarily transcendental. The person who wants money or who wants relief or the person who's just curious, they have some material interest in the realm of karma. That's called karma mishra bhakti. Bhakti mixed with some desire for some sort of fruitive result, gross or subtle. But the jnani is on the transcendental platform because jnana by nature is transcendental. As soon as jnana becomes practical, it's no longer jnana. Jnana is by nature theoretical, and therefore it's transcendental, and especially spiritual knowledge. Now the jnani is somebody who is fixed in Atma Tattva, Atma Jnana. His knowledge is necessarily transcendental. Therefore, when this person adopts devotional service, he's coming not from a mundane platform, but he's coming from a transcendental platform. Therefore, Krishna says, I consider him tvatmaiva me matam. He's considered to be as good as I am, because he's transcendental, right? So someone might, the question might be raised. In fact, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur does raise the question. nanumami vanuttamam gatimastitah iti brushe. If you say that, he comes to me in the supreme destination, ata sagyani bhaktas twameva parapnoti. Is he the only one who gets you? No. They all are great souls. They're all devotees, as Prabhupada says. But there are different categories of devotees. There are always different categories. There's always variety. There's always stratification. In modern society, we don't like the word stratification. We don't like the word discrimination also. But this is an eternal fact. Difference. It's called Bheda. And it's so important to realize this, that Madhvacharya dedicated his entire life only to establishing this principle, in contradistinction to the impersonal tendency that Srila Prabhupada has mentioned already in tonight's purport. Srila Prabhupada says, when we begin Krishna consciousness, and beginning of Krishna consciousness means when we are on one of these four levels. We may have been doing it for 50 years or Bahunam Janmanam Ante. But that's still beginning of Krishna consciousness because it is neophyte. So in this neophyte condition, we have a tendency to disregard things that are actually pure and transcendental as if they were mundane. And we have a tendency also, the opposite tendency, to take things that are mundane and give those things the importance that is due only to things that are transcendental. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that people in this material world, they treat the Supreme Personality of Godhead as if he were a mundane object, and they treat mundane objects or people as if they were the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is what it really means, practically. So, first thing, it is not only the Jnani. Just because Krishna singles him out as being transcendental in his approach, and also says he's verily myself, and says he's also very dear to me. These three things he said already. But that doesn't mean that only the Jnani is going to attain him. They all attain him. But therefore the question is raised here. Kintu Kitaya samayad anantaram sa jnani bhakta adhikari bhavati tyata aha bahunam iti. He speaks this verse to show us, when does this person attain to Krishna? Even the jnani who is coming from a transcendental platform to begin with, he takes many, many, many births. It's not that easy to do. He goes on to say, Vasudeva sarvamiti sarvatra Vasudeva darshi jnanavan bahunam janmanamante mam prapadyate. One surrenders unto Krishna full in knowledge when he sees nothing but Vasudeva. Vasudeva darshi. He doesn't see anything except Vasudeva. Do we see things other than Vasudeva? Yes, we do. We do. We certainly do. That's what I just described. We see mundane things and we regard them as highly as one should regard Vasudeva, and we treat Vasudeva as if he were something mundane and neglectable. That is, in fact, one of the offenses against the Harinam that we sing every morning from Padma Purana. So, this is an important point. Now, Tadrisha sadhu yadrichika sangavashat, out of association of those sadhus who are appropriate to elevate one, such a person, mat prapatim prapnoti, such a person actually gets to the stage called prapatti. What does prapatti mean? Sharanagati. It means surrender. Surrender unto Krishna. That's what he's talking about here. And of course we know Sharanagati has 6 divisions. I don't think we have time to go into that now. But presumably most of you are familiar with that. So, Sacha Jnani Bhakto Mahatma Susthira Chitta. Such a person, the Jnani Bhakta, that is to say, not exactly Jnana Mishra Bhakta, but the Bhakta who's tinged with Jnana still. or the bhakta who is qualified by jnana, we might say. What is his symptom here mentioned? Susthira chitta. Susthira chitta. Unmovable. He's absolutely fixed in his consciousness. He's not bewildered. Raise your hand if you sometimes become bewildered. You don't have to raise your hands. We all know where we stand. And it is the glory of Bhakti Devi, and it is the mercy, as Prabhupada mentions in his own purport here, which we'll review in a moment. It is the mercy of the Lord that he gives us the occasion to recognize when we are conditioned. And in fact, when one is advancing in devotional service, it really is just a process of revelation of how conditional I am, and therefore how conditioned I am. That's actually mercy, but we might call it tough love, because it hurts. When we have to see something about ourselves that's not very flattering, it's a little painful. And sometimes sometimes the only way to learn something is to suffer. Have you ever suffered? Well, we've all suffered. So, how many people have been, you don't have to raise your hands, have you been traumatized? He said very nicely the other day in class, I mentioned also, when you put a fork, especially a wet fork, in the electrical outlet and you hold on to it, you will have an experience that is called an epiphany. It's a wake-up experience. It brings you to a whole new level of realization of what it means to be electrocuted. We can speak about it in physical terms. We can speak about it in biological terms, those who are doctors. We can speak about it in any number of theoretical ways, but it means something absolutely different once you actually get that electrical shock. Therefore, we sometimes have to suffer. Not sometimes, everybody suffers in life. Everybody has to go through suffering. This place is characterized by suffering. And that suffering is also mercy, as we mentioned earlier. Because it brings us to realize that, we talk about very transcendental things. It's very high, the things that we speak about. But it's very hard to actually, to be susthira chitta. Therefore the word is very carefully chosen. Susthira. Sthira means to be fixed. Susthira means unshakable, immovably fixed. Chitta, in his consciousness. So he says, there are a couple of adjectives here. Susthira chitta sudurlabha. He's also very rare. And he gives the example of this verse, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. Anybody know what that means? Manushyanam sahasreshu ityadi? Out of many thousands of people, somebody's either curious or distressed or seeking wealth, or he's actually a jnani, and he will worship Krishna. And out of many thousands of such persons, one person actually comes to this level. So out of many thousands, one will do this, and out of many thousands of such persons, Krishna says, one will understand me. Basically, it means 1 in a million. Therefore, he continues, Iti yaduksehe ekantata bhaktas tu kimuteti. Then what to speak, if we're talking about the jnani bhakta tonight, in these terms, then what to speak of the ekantika bhakta? Ekantika bhakta means pure devotee. Ekantik, he's only concerned with one thing, that is Krishna. He doesn't care anymore about karma, he no longer cares about jnana. He's only in devotional service. He's a pure devotee, absolutely spotless. So what to speak of a pure devotee? If the jnani bhakta is sudurlabha, most rare, then he says, Satu ati sudurlabha eveti bhava. The idea here is that such a person is exceedingly most rare. So, is everyone thoroughly discouraged now? Exceedingly most rare is a good way to translate ati sudurlabha. Durlabha, labha, labhate means you get something. Durlabha means it's not easy to get. So that's one form of rarity all of it. Sudurlabha means it's exceeding very, And then ati sudurlabha, it's off the charts. It's off the charts. Therefore, he mentioned this morning in the class, Shachinandan Maharaj, I also mentioned the other day that ashabantha, samutkantha, these are the signs of what we call bhava bhakti. When we have some hope against hope, even though everything is hopeless, what chance did Srila Prabhupada have in 1965? No encouragement from his godbrothers, no money, no contacts. He didn't have a strategic plan. Or maybe he did in his mind, or so, I don't know. You can read Brahmananda Prabhu's new book. He writes, we get some very fascinating insights into what Srila Prabhupada was doing, while the rest of us, well, what were we doing? Maybe we were in our last body. Those who are younger. Anyway, Srila Prabhupada went through such difficulties, and he had every reason to be discouraged, and yet he did not give up hope. He did not renounce the order of his spiritual master. Suppose you are the last devotee on the planet. Let us say something happens. ISKCON, everything is dissipated, right? Vaporized, dissolved. God forbid. Don't want to say these things in Kartik and Vrindavan. But for the purpose of instruction, I've heard Tamal Krishna Goswami say this before. Suppose that you are the last devotee on the planet, the only devotee, that is to say. The only serious devotee. What would you do? We have 90% of our work done for us. We've got a whole institution. We've got every kind of devotee. You can find one if you're determined, who will inspire you. We've got these books. We've got the deities. We have prasadam. Well, where would we be without prasadam? In a few hours, you would know it. Or as somebody said, maybe this morning, Maharaj also said, water. Where will you be without water even? We're so dependent. We're so conditioned. But we're very fortunate because in this Kali Yuga, this dawning of what Prabhupada called the Chandrodaya, Mayapur Chandrodaya, the dawning of this golden moon of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's come about, and we can see that it's going everywhere. People are chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. In Africa, in Australia, every continent. Huh? Iran also. Nice devotees in Iran. I know some. So, anyway, we're talking about the Sudurlabha principle. It's very rare, but we have every reason to be hopeful because Rup Goswami has a very nice song he's written. I think it's in his Stavamala. Krishna Deva Bhavantam Vande. And in that song he says, even Brahma and Shiva, they cannot attain your lotus feet, so who am I? But I know about your mercy. I know how merciful you are and how fallen I am. We have this one great fortune that in the Kali Yuga, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is choosing those people who are the most fallen to give them the opportunity. All we have to do is grab it. We just have to hold it, embrace it, bring it inside, as Maharaj said. With the holy name, you invite him inside, you treat him nicely so he doesn't want to go. Don't neglect, as we discussed already. So, Vasudeva Sarvamiti. A person can come to this level of surrender eventually, but it may take many births. Are you ready to wait? No, we're not ready to wait. Generally, we are manda, sumanda, mati, manda, bhagyahi, upadruta, always agitated, impatient, and lazy, and these are the natural qualifications that come along with birth. So it may take some time. But Prabhupada promised us, you follow these principles, you chant 16 rounds of this mantra without offense. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He said you will go back to Godhead. How will we go back to Godhead? By holding on to his dhoti. Only. Only. I mentioned this also. Every day we sing, Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma. You're not going to find this bhakti in some kunj here in Vrindavan, independently of Srila Prabhupada. You will only find it in his lotus feet. Sometimes people talk about taking shelter in, maybe some Gaudiya Mat or some other line or some, other, they don't understand. The only thing we want is the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. This is the only thing, the only place where bhakti resides. For us, at least. Important thing to consider. So, yadrishik sangha vashat. It comes about by association, this kind of association. Those who are completely dedicated like this. Then, a person can attain prapatti for Krishna. And having attained that, he realizes Vasudeva Sarvamati. Vasudeva is everything. What does that mean? It's an interesting point. I think it's Baladev Vidyabhushan in his own commentary. He quotes from the Chandogya Upanishad, as Prabhupada has also done here, that it is prana. Prana is actually a very interesting thing. Prana is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's mentioned in Mundaka Upanishad, many Upanishads. One of the names, also in Vishnu Sahasranama, Prana is one of the names of Lord Vishnu. And prana also happens to be that life force which sustains the entire cosmic manifestation. How does he do it? How does he sustain life? Anybody who knows? Chapter 15, can you guess what I'm thinking of? Very, very nice verses are there. Gama vishya bhutani dharyami ahamojasa pushnami chaushadhi sarva somo bhutva rasatmaka. Now what does this have to do with prana? Anybody knows Ayurveda has some idea. Gam avishya. Gam is like a cow. Gam means a cow, but it also means the earth, because the earth is also like a cow. Kama dukha. Cow is giving you milk, the miracle food for babies and old men, Srila Prabhupada said. Milk sustains us, and the cows, they are sustained by whom? Earth. So earth is also, indirectly you can say cow. Gama vishya bhutani dharyami. I sustain all living beings in this world. How does he do it? Through prana. What's the second half? Pushnami choshadhi sarva. We are all shakaharis. We're all vegetarians. So who puts the nutrients into the things that we eat? Who gives us the digestive power to process those things and turn them into the energy that we require? This is prana. This is prana. And how does prana circulate throughout the body? Soma. Therefore he says somo. Choshiji sarva somo bhutva rasatmakaha. They become rasatmaka. Rasa means the elixir of life. Physical properties we're talking about. This is not transcendental knowledge. This is how the material world works. We can digest things, and the things that we digest have their potency innate within them, to the extent that prana is allowed to permeate them. And that prana is facilitated through soma. Soma is what? The moon. There are three energies in this world. There's the sun, that's the fire, basically, Agni, Soma, and Vayu. Movement. You see? The sun in the modern world, when we're so burnt by so many technology mainly, electricity, electromagnetic frequencies, and so many things, it's very easy to get singed in this world. Therefore, soma is so important for us, because soma represents the nourishing, cooling properties of this universe, like milk. Somo bhutva rasatmaka. I become soma, Krishna says. Somo bhutva rasatmaka. And I make these vegetables full of rasa that you require, and I infuse them, and then aham vaishvanaro bhutva praninam dehamashritah prana apana, what is it? Samayukta pachami annam chaturvidham. Through prana, again, I help you to digest these things also. I become the fire of digestion within. You can, not only you can, I mean, my mother had this disease. She could eat anything, but she could not derive nutrition from it. It was a digestive disorder. So, if you can digest what you eat, it's Krishna's mercy. Don't take it for granted. Don't think that you can just put anything in there. Some of the things I see people eat. I've been on an Ayurvedic diet for many years now, and it's just, it completely, it just astonishes me to see what people do to themselves. And it doesn't last. Yeah, I mean, you end up needing dialysis in some after some time. Anyway, this is Krishna's energy. This is Krishna as prana. Prana. Very, very important thing. So, he says, he's quoting the Chandogya Shruti, and also he skips ahead to chapter 11, text number 40, which Prabhupada dutifully mentions at the end of his purport. So let's go and take a look at that. Sarvam samapnoshi tatosi sarvaha. You are all pervading, and therefore you are sarvaha, everything. This confirms Vasudeva Sarvam Iti. And how is he all pervading? According to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he's all pervading through prana. Pranena. Now, let's see what Srila Prabhupada has done with this. This is the background, at least given by Vishwanath Chakravarti. Srila Prabhupada is largely following Baladev Vidyabhushan. But please, let's manage our cell phones. Let me set the example. Okay? Yeah, done. Srila Prabhupada says here, he has a very unique vision of this. He, instead of talking about prana so much, because that's kind of scientific or metaphysical or cosmological, you might say, he looks at it more in devotional terms or in emotional terms. One becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead when he realizes that in all things there is some relationship with the Personality of Godhead. And he sees that this material manifestation is not independent of him. He realizes that the material world is a perverted reflection of spiritual variety. Why should Maya have all the toys? It doesn't make any sense. Everything is actually meant for Krishna's enjoyment. And according to some Vaishnava, at least one Vaishnava Acharya says, that when you take all the things of this world, even all the sensual enjoyment of this world, and you give it to Krishna, then you're no longer living in the material world. That's called Shuddhadvaita, purified monism. It all becomes Krishna. It all becomes Yogamaya, as it were. They don't see a Mahamaya. Because if you think about it, once you become a pure devotee, this Mahamaya just no longer exists. In his commentary on the Chatushloki Bhagavata, Srila Jiva Goswami comments in this way, that when one is absorbed in Mahamaya, he cannot have the realization of someone in Yogamaya. And when one is absorbed in Yogamaya, he cannot have the realization of someone who is in Mahamaya. They are mutually exclusive. That's a big topic, but the idea here is that we should see that everything here is actually meant for Krishna's enjoyment. And all the variety of this world is a manifestation of Krishna's enjoyment, but in a perverted way. In a perverted way. Therefore we call sex desire adirasa. Adirasa. Why? Because it is actually the basis. Whether you're in the spiritual world or in the material world, it makes no difference. We also call this world Devi Dham. What does Devi Dham mean in the Brahma Samhita? Devi Dham. Yeah, the Durga is running things, but generally women also run things. Ultimately, if you think about it, sensitively, you can see this. So you're in the material world or you're in the spiritual world, you've got to serve the females. Because this is the absolute truth. Do you catch me? what I'm saying. You cannot have material enjoyment without the female in this material world. That is a fact. Therefore, they're called stri. They expand this field of material enjoyment. In the spiritual world, it's also not going to happen. If you try to come with the pure masculine energy, that's valid, but there's no enjoyment then. You see? He wants his Varani Shakti. Let me give you an example. We were talking this afternoon, one South Indian devotee and I, about Madhvacharya's Dwadasha Stotra. In his Dwadasha Stotra, he writes one verse, very beautiful verse. Ostensibly, he's glorifying Ajita, Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But how does he do so? He spends 90% of the verse glorifying Lakshmi Devi instead. He says, Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, Sadhana, Pralaya Sarga, Mahavibhutehe, Vritti, Prakasha, Niyama, Avriti, Bandha, Mokshaha. Yasya apanga lava matratar urjita sa shrir yat kataksha balavati ajitam namami. Who is she? Lakshmi. She is such a personality that by her mere sidelong glance she can affect the creation of these universes, their sustenance, their ultimate destruction. Sarga, the subsequent creations, Mahavibhuti, the great wonders that intoxicate us all in this material world, the great fascinations that we find. Mahavibhute Vritti, your occupations, your engagements, whatever it is that you can or do. Vritti Prakasha, your illumination. Niyama, your discipline, your rules, the laws. These things are all coming from her. Avriti bandha mokshaha. When you're covered over, that's also coming from her. Bandha moksha, bondage, liberation, all of it extends from her sidelong glance. Therefore, he says, I worship this Ajita, whose Shri is affecting all this. So what does it say about Ajita? He's not really Ajita, is he? He's Jita. That brings us to Jayashri. Jayashri. Who is Jayashri? It's a common name in North India, especially Gujarat. So Jayashri means that form of Srimati Lakshmi Devi who conquers even Shri herself. Think about this. Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavatabhis Tabhirya Evanajrupataya Kalabhihi. What does it mean? In the spiritual world, Lakshmi Sahasrashata Sambhrama Sevyamanam. Thousands of Lakshmis are scurrying about, busily engaged in the service of Govinda. How do they do this? Srimati Radharani expands as Lakshmi Devi in exactly the same way that Krishna expands as Narayana Adi Vigrahas. And she has her expansions here in Vrindavan. Lakshmi Devi is living just across the river in Bilvavan. Eternally, we heard this morning, she's here. Right? Shrayata Indira. And Vrinda Devi is there near Nandagaon. And Yogamaya is in Radha Govinda temple. These are her kalas. Lalita Vishaka we have here in their own house. And many, many, many others. All of them are worshipping Krishna. And we have to get their mercy. We heard this morning. We have to beg from them, and then they will share. Some degree, they will empower us with this Ladani Shakti. We can also render some pleasing service unto the Lord, if that's what we want. Otherwise, if you want the other side, then, namastasyai, 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 namo namah. You have her counterpart in this material world, Durga. And it's interesting, a very similar verse we find, Srishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Reka Chaiva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga. Very similar. They work the same way. The mechanics of Yoga Maya and Mahamaya are almost indistinguishable. Therefore, avajananti ma mudha. This is, in the beginning we mentioned, people take Krishna to be something mundane, they take the mundane to be transcendental. Because they work the same way. So, when one appreciates this principle that Prabhupada is speaking about, that actually all variety is meant for Krishna's enjoyment ultimately, then he is in full knowledge. Then he can surrender. Then he gets prapatti, as we said. Now, there was something he said that was very, very deep. At such a time, one can understand that Lord Shri Krishna's mercy is everything. Why does he mention mercy when his acharya is speaking about prana? Where does mercy come in here? This is something that we get from Srila Prabhupada. Generally, Srila Prabhupada's purports, he always very closely, faithfully represents the predecessor acharyas. And in this purport also he's done so. But sometimes we see that he adds something that only he could see for today's context. If you want a better example, look at chapter 4, text number 10. He lists the 3 things that keep us from surrendering. Does anybody know that verse offhand? Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha? Yeah. Yes. So what are the 3 things that Prabhupada's purport? I already told you to turn it off. What are the 3 things that Prabhupada dilates on in his purport? Attachment to the mundane. Those are the ones who want to worship Durga or they want to steal from Durga. Either way. Yobhunkte stena evasa. You have two varieties. That's called punya and papa. And generally in the modern world it means papa, and in the traditional world it means punya. That's how we can categorize karma. Then you have, what is the next one? Vita, raga, bhaya. What are we afraid of? What does Prabhupada say there? Anybody know that purport? It's very deep what he says. He says we are afraid of our own identity. Do you know who you are? No, you don't. In the material world, we don't know who we are. Do you know who you are in the spiritual world? Well, you may or may not. I'm not going to judge that. But Srila Prabhupada, he explains this at some length in that purport, and he repeats many times the same points. We are afraid of the idea of retaining personal existence in this absolute eternal world. We are afraid of the idea that he mentions in tonight's purport, that all this variety of the material creation is actually ultimately spiritual. That scares us. It scares us. And therefore people take to impersonalism, or worse still, they take to Buddhism. Buddhism is so popular now because, after all, who's going to argue with Shanti in today's world? I mentioned already, we're so singed by the pungent nature of modern life that everybody needs some time out. Time out means nirvana. Actually, it's not just time out, it's snuffing out. Therefore, Prabhupada rightly says, what was the word he uses for this? Spiritual suicide, yeah, that's another one he says. I don't remember just. Huh? Nihilism, yeah, he says something like that. Anyway, that's the idea. So Buddhism and impersonalism, these are the problems. And we carry these ideas into Krishna consciousness, which Prabhupada mentions in the beginning of his purport. And we look at the order of the spiritual master and we think that this is something mundane, or it's something impractical, or it's something that I shouldn't be doing, or it's not for Kali Yuga, or it's for someone else, or so many things the mind will tell us. Because we don't see the transcendental nature here. So, mercy. Mercy means that if one is submissive, that's called sushrushu. If one is ready to learn something and hear, and ready to apply that and do something practical, pariprashnena sevaya, then the mercy is given to one. This is when we get mercy. So at this point he becomes a pure devotee, and this is Prabhupada's take on this. He doesn't really go into the metaphysics that we heard from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and others. But he does mention them. He mentions all the verses that the acharyas are quoting here. So these are just a few things we can think about this. As I said, I hardly touched on Baladev's commentary. Has a whole new realm of meaning as well, but I think that it's adequately represented in Srila Prabhupada's purport, as usual. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this? It's now 6 o'clock. Yes?
Surrender, we have 6 items. It's less 2 items.